Welcome to this awareness briefing on recent changes to fire safety standards in the building regulations. The Department of Finance is responsible for maintaining the building regulations in Northern Ireland. So this briefing will take you through the recent changes to the legislation as a result of the statutory rule, the Building Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2024. We'll also cover the accompanying guidance changes in the supporting technical booklets. There will be a brief summary at the end and some contact details for any questions you may wish to submit. Web addresses to access the documents will also be given. Just a little bit about the building regulations legislation. The primary legislation here concerning building regulations is the Building Regulations Northern Ireland Order 1979 as amended. This order has been amended by the Planning and Building Regulations Amendment Northern Ireland Order of 1990 and the Building Amendment Act Northern Ireland of 2009. So one of the powers in the 1979 order, Article 3, allows the department to make building regulations. So using that power, the department makes building regulations and amendments to them. And the current building regulations are the Building Regulations Northern Ireland 2012 as amended. The original building regulations in 2012 consisted of 99 regulations and 3 schedules. The regulations are split into different parts, covering different aspects to design. Since 2012, the regulations have been numbered 1 to 99. Regulation 1 is in Part A, Interpretation and General, and Regulation 99 is in Part V, Glazing. 4 extra regulations have been added through the amendments since 2012, and with the addition of 2 new regulations under this 2024 amendment, there is now a total of 105 regulations. The parts solely changing with this 2024 amendment are Parts A and Part E. For information purposes, schedules are written to regulations where a lot of detail is associated with that regulation. So Schedule 1 is written to Regulation 3, Transitional Provisions. Schedule 2 is written to Regulation 4, Exemptions. And Schedule 3 is written to Regulation 9, Giving of Notices and Deposit of Plans. As stated, since 2012, the regulations have been amended 4 times in the years 2012, 2014, 2016 and 2022. The 2012 amendment amended Part A of the building regulations in relation to a procedural matter for issuing of a contravention notice. The 2014 amendment amended Part F, Conservation of Fuel and Power. The 2016 amendment introduced a new Part M, Physical Infrastructure for High-Speed Electronic Communications Networks, into the building regulations. And the 2022 amendment introduced a new Regulation 23.2 in Part B, Materials and Workmanship, which requires the use of non-combustible materials as part of external walls and specified attachments of certain relevant buildings. The 2022 amendment also amended Part C, Site Preparation and Resistance to Contaminants and Moisture, for the definition of radon affected area. So the changes we're going to talk about today are contained in the Building Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2024. This statutory rule is the 5th amendment to the 2012 Building Regulations. It was made law on the 4th of November 2024, with the requirements coming into operation on the 6th of May 2025. The changes are to Part A, Interpretation and General, and Part E, Fire Safety, of the building regulations. Taking Part E first, prior to this amendment, it consisted of 6 regulations numbered 32 to 37. Regulation 32 is the general application and interpretation for the other 5 regulations. So Regulation 33 requires adequate means of escape. Regulation 34 requires adequate resistance to the spread of flame for internal linings. Regulation 35 requires adequate resistance to the spread of fire within the structure of a building. Regulation 36 requires adequate resistance to the spread of fire over external walls and roofs. And Regulation 37 requires reasonable facilities and access to assist the fire and rescue service in ensuring the safety of people in and about a building in the event of a fire. This amendment introduces 2 new regulations into Part E. A new Regulation 37A, Fire Safety Information, and a new Regulation 37B, Automatic Fire Suppression Systems. As a result, Part E now consists of 8 regulations running from 32 to 37B. Please note Regulations 37A and 37B are not associated with Regulation 37. They are labelled as such purely for numbering reasons. We cannot at this stage number them Regulation 38 and Regulation 39 because those regulations already exist in the next part of the building regulations in Part F. When the regulations are consolidated in the future, they will likely be renumbered 38 and 39, but that may be some years off. Also part of this amendment is changes to Regulation 32 for the application of new Regulations 37A and 37B and some new definitions for terms used in the new regulations. So taking new Regulation 37A first, it reads, where a building is a relevant premises or contains one or more flats, the person carrying out the work shall A. provide adequate fire safety information to the person with fire safety duties in a building not later than the date of completion of the work or the date of occupation of the building or extension, whichever is the earlier, and B. not later than 5 days after the date provided for in subparagraph A, give a notice in writing to the District Council stating that the requirements of subparagraph A have been met. So it can be difficult to establish what fire safety measures have been incorporated in a building or what assumptions have been made by designers in the fire safety strategy for the building. This new requirement for as-built fire safety information will help to identify and document what fire safety measures have been incorporated and what assumptions have been made. It will benefit those responsible for operating and maintaining the building for fire safety purposes. It will also assist fire risk assessors in carrying out fire risk assessments under the Fire and Rescue Services Northern Ireland Order 2006. So the regulation provides a link between those who design and build fire safety measures in a building with those who are tasked with maintaining those measures when the building is occupied. Hence the link in the regulation to the Fire and Rescue Services Northern Ireland Order of 2006, which is the relevant legislation that applies when a building becomes occupied. New definitions for some key terms in the regulation are given for relevant premises, fire safety information, and fire safety duties. These definitions are located in Regulation 32, the application and interpretation of Part E. As you can see, the definitions of fire safety duties and relevant premises refer out to articles in the Fire and Rescue Services Northern Ireland Order of 2006 for their meaning. You'll find Article 52 for the meaning of fire safety duties, cross-references to various other articles in that order. Example, Article 25 for duties for employers, Article 26 for duties on relevant premises, and Article 28 for duties on employees. So Regulation 37A applies to relevant premises as defined under Article 50 in the Fire and Rescue Services Northern Ireland Order 2006. This basically means all buildings bar domestic type premises. Dwelling houses and flats are not relevant premises, whereas a HMO is a relevant premises under the order. Because we want this requirement to apply to buildings with flats, they are identified separately for the regulation also applying to. At consultation stage, it was proposed to apply 37A to buildings containing flats with a story 11 metres or more above ground level. This has changed from consultation to apply to all buildings containing flats irrespective of story height. And the type of work when 37A applies is when a building is newly erected, when a building is extended and/or altered, and when a building is formed after a material change of use. New guidance to this regulation is given in Technical Booklet E, along with the detail of information that should be provided. The guidance clarifies the extent of information required when an existing building is extended or altered. The other new regulation in Part E is 37B, Automatic Fire Suppression Systems. So 37B1 requires a building to be designed and constructed with a suitable automatic fire suppression system. 37B2 lists in a prescriptive way the limitation of the requirement to specific building types. Those types are A building containing one or more flats with a story more than 11 metres above ground level. B, a building containing purpose-built student accommodation with a story more than 11 metres above ground level. And C, residential care premises. So I don't think anyone will argue with the building types on this list for 37B to apply to. I know some will want us to go further and add hotels, schools, hospitals, specialised housing types, for example, sheltered housing, extra care housing, and supported living dwellings. But I think this list is a start with a view to considering other building types to be added when the necessary evidence or research becomes available. So the regulation is about recognising the effective role sprinklers can play in saving lives and preventing injuries. Sprinklers control fire spread and fire size, allowing additional time for residents to escape and for the fire and rescue service to respond. Requirements on this issue varies across England, Scotland, Wales and the Republic of Ireland. Requirements for each jurisdiction are generally based on research commissioned over the last 20 years by the English, Welsh and Scottish governments, the Chief Fire Officers Association, and carried out by the Building Research Establishment, BRE. So this new regulation brings the position here on automatic fire suppression systems provision closer to those other jurisdictions. Again, there are key terms in this regulation that require definition, and those terms are above ground level, purpose-built student accommodation, and residential care premises. So these terms are defined in Regulation 32 of Part E. Above ground level meaning makes a cross-reference to where it is previously defined in Part B of the building regulations. Purpose-built student accommodation means housing built specifically for students to live in. So there's been a plethora of these that have shot up in the Belfast area in the last 7 or 8 years, and our understanding is more are in the pipeline. So automatic fire suppression systems such as sprinklers is seen as the most effective and efficient way of protecting both lives and property in the student sector. And lastly, definition for residential care premises covers residential care homes, nursing homes, children's homes, and family residence centres, all having the meaning assigned in the Health and Personal Social Services Quality Improvement and Regulation Northern Ireland Order 2003. The type of work that triggers the requirement of Regulation 37B is specified in Regulation 32, and that is when one of the building types on the list is newly erected, formed after a material change of use, or when an existing building is extended and/or altered, but only where 37B has been applied to the building. With regard to this last category, it would be very onerous to apply this requirement to all extensions or alterations, as you would end up with automatic fire suppression in piecemeal format in a building. The mechanism of Regulation 7, application to alterations and extensions in the building regulations, would not necessarily lead to having to provide automatic fire suppression to the existing building as well as the extension. The likelihood is, in most cases, it would not be required. Where we think it makes sense to ask for the extension to be fitted with automatic fire suppression is where the existing building is already fitted or being fitted with automatic fire suppression. Hence the wording of C in requiring 37B to a limited number of extensions and/or alterations. So that's the changes to Part E, fire safety of the building regulations. As mentioned earlier, there's also changes in Part A, interpretation and general. Because both regulations 37A and 37B apply when a building in scope is formed after a material change of use, under Regulation 8, application to material change of use, the table has been amended and the notes to the table have been amended. So this revised table and notes demonstrate for the various cases of material change of use when regulations 37A and 37B apply, along with demonstrating when all the other regulations apply for the various cases. Going back to the primary legislation of the Building Regulations Northern Ireland Order of 1979 as amended, there is a power under Article 5A where the Department may prepare guidance with respect to the requirements of building regulations. So in relation to the requirements of Part E, fire safety of the building regulations, the Department prepares Technical Booklet E, fire safety, TBE. So the regulations are couched in a functional way of adequate provision or reasonable provision. The guidance in TBE gives technical provisions as to what is adequate. The guidance in Technical Booklet E is one way to demonstrate compliance with the Part E regulations, and if you follow the technical provisions in TBE, there is a presumption of compliance with the regulations for common design or building situations. You may choose to use TBE as the benchmark of performance in order to comply with the Part E regulations, so that any other solution you are assessing has to demonstrate an equal level of performance or better. So TBE of 2012 consists of the following. The Part E regulations from the building regulations have been replicated in Technical Booklet E since 2012, and the move from deemed to satisfy to guidance format. There's also a section which outlines performance and introduction to provisions for each regulation in Part E, and then there are 6 sections and 3 appendices. So section 1 is a general section which includes definitions applicable throughout the book. Section 2 gives guidance on means of escape provisions to Regulation 33 in Part E. Section 3 gives guidance on adequate fire resistance to flame spread for linings to Regulation 34 in Part E. Section 4 gives guidance on adequate fire resistance to internal fire spread in the structure under Regulation 35 in Part E. Section 5 gives guidance for adequate resistance to spread of fire externally on walls and roofs under Regulation 36. And Section 6 gives guidance on facilities and access for the Fire and Rescue Service under Regulation 37 in Part E. The three appendices provide information on the different purpose groups, rules for measurement, for example, height of a building, etc., and a list of the publications referred to throughout the book. Due to this 2024 amendment, the technical booklet has had changes throughout. The significant amendments are to Section 2, Means of Escape, Section 6, Facilities and Access for the Fire and Rescue Service, and the addition of new Section 7, Fire Safety Information, and Section 8, Automatic Fire Suppression Systems, to support the two new regulations, 37A and 37B. Taking the changes section by section in TBE in order, in Part E regulations have been updated to include new regulations 37A and 37B, and also to include the changes to Regulation 32. Under the Guidance, Performance and Introduction to Provisions section, and the specific approaches for the design of means of escape given under Regulation 33, for shopping complexes, the relevant recommendations of BS 9999 is now cited rather than BS 5588 Part 10. For healthcare premises, HTM 0502, which is Fire Code Guidance in Support of Functional Provisions, Fire Safety in the Design of Healthcare Premises, is referenced rather than the Northern Ireland Fire Code suite. However, for residential care in Northern Ireland, the HTM 05 suite does not cover that area, and so the relevant guidance in the Northern Ireland Fire Code documents should still be used. For assembly buildings, the relevant recommendations of BS 9999 is cited rather than BS 5588 Part 6. And for houses in multiple occupation, HMOs, the Houses in Multiple Occupation Fire Safety Guide, published by the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service, is now cited. Still under the Guidance, Performance and Introduction to Provisions section, for the two new regulations 37A and 37B, there is new Performance and Introduction to Provisions guidance. The performance guidance to facilities and access for the Fire and Rescue Service is also added to. In Section 1, there are new definitions for the terms above ground level, fire safety duties, fire safety information, habitable room, purpose-built student accommodation, relevant premises, and residential care premises. So these replicate the definitions for the same terms used in the Part E regulations. In fact, they mostly refer back to the definition from Part E. The definition of habitable room is taken from the definition used in BS 9991 of 2015, and it does differ from that of the definition used in Part A of the building regulations. In Section 2, Means of Escape and Automatic Fire Detection and Fire Alarm Systems in Dwelling Houses and Flats, the guidance has been amended to require a smoke alarm or alarms in every habitable room, as opposed to the previous requirement of the principal habitable room. So this is where the new definition of habitable room applies and will mean smoke detection in all rooms, bar kitchens, utility rooms, bathrooms, shower rooms, dressing rooms, storerooms, or WCs. In relation to provision of smoke alarms and heat alarms, some new guidance is added to recognized radio-linked interconnection between hardwired smoke alarms and/or heat alarms may be used. There is also a change for large dwellings where there is a story more than 200 meters squared in area. The automatic fire detection and fire alarm system needs to be at least to grade A, category LD2 with smoke alarms in every habitable room. So the grade B and the number of stories criteria has been removed from the guidance in relation to large dwellings. In relation to fire detection and fire alarm systems in existing dwellings, there is new guidance to clarify the level of detection coverage expected when an extension and/or alteration work occurs which results in a new habitable room or kitchen being formed. So the guidance clarifies that in these situations, an automatic fire detection and fire alarm system should be installed covering the new habitable room or kitchen, the circulation spaces from the new room to the final exit, and to any habitable room or kitchen opening on to the circulation spaces leading from the new room to the final exit. So there will still be an element of assessing provision on a case-by-case basis, but this new guidance should give clarity on what is expected in these types of situations. Also in section 2, the means of escape provisions for flats has changed from referencing BS 5588 Part 1 to BS 9991. And the version of 9991 referenced is the 2015 version. The Department is aware of the recent publication of the new BS 9991 on the 27th of November 2024, but as these changes were made on the 4th of November 2024, the version of 9991 cited in Technical Booklet E is the 2015 version. With regard to smoke control provisions in the common escape routes of flats, TBE also now makes reference to BS 9991 2015. However, we did think the 2015 version was not in line with more recent guidance from the Smoke Control Association contained in Guidance on Smoke Control to Common Escape Routes in Apartment Buildings, Flats and Maisonettes of July 2020 publication. So for 3 items, we have chosen to override the contents of 9991 2015 and be in line with the Smoke Control Association guidance. And hence the 3 items on screen, paragraphs 234B, C and D in TBE are detailed in Technical Booklet E. Again, it's unfortunate around dates of publication because our understanding is the 2024 version of 9991 has been amended to align on these 3 items with the Smoke Control Association guidance. So it results in it's likely as part of a future amendment, probably the next amendment that we make, TBE will move to citing BS 9991 2024 and remove paragraphs 234B, C and D. In section 6 of TBE, Facilities and Access for the Fire and Rescue Service, there are a number of changes to assist the Fire and Rescue Service in operational functions of firefighting and search and rescue. So these are changes to firefighting shaft provision, hose laying distances to a fire main, a lower maximum story height for provision of a dry fire mains, more onerous fire vehicle access distances, and new requirements for the provision of evacuation alert sounder systems, wayfinding signage, and secure information boxes in buildings containing flats with a story more than 11 metres above ground level. Taking these one item at a time, TBE now requires all Purpose Group 5 assembly and recreation buildings that have a story 900 metres squared or more in area at a height of 7.5 metres or more above fire and rescue service access level to have firefighting shaft provision. So all buildings with a story more than 18 metres above fire and rescue service access level require firefighting shaft provision. Already Purpose Group 4 shops and commercial, Purpose Group 6, industrial, and Purpose Group 7A, storage buildings, require firefighting shaft provision at 7.5 metres above fire and rescue service access level. This amendment adds Purpose Group 5, assembly and recreation buildings, to that requirement. There's also a new diagram 6.0 added to TBE, and this illustrates the components of a firefighting shaft for A, any building, and B, a firefighting shaft serving flats. There is a change in the guidance that relates to the hose line distance from anywhere on a floor to a fire main. For buildings with stories not fitted with sprinklers, a new additional criteria has to be met for buildings requiring firefighting shaft provision. So previously in TBE for these buildings, the sole criteria was that each part of the floor was to be within 60 metres of a fire main in a firefighting shaft. This requirement continues to apply. However, the amendment means in addition to that, each part of the floor is to be within 45 metres of a fire main. That fire main does not necessarily have to be in a firefighting shaft, but could be in a protected stairway. The 60 metres and 45 metre distances are hose line distances. So if working off plans, direct distances allowable would be 2/3 of these figures, i.e. 40 metres and 30 metres respectively. This is the new diagram 6.1b that has been added to TBE to illustrate this new requirement. For the top two figures, A and B, where sprinklers are provided, only one criteria applies in that each part of the floor is to be within 60 metres of a fire main in a firefighting shaft. For figure A, one firefighting shaft is sufficient to ensure all parts of the floor are within 60 metres of a fire main. For figure B, because one firefighting shaft does not cover the whole floor, a second firefighting shaft is required to ensure all parts of the floor are within 60 metres of a fire main in a firefighting shaft. Figures C, D and E are buildings without sprinklers, and hence the additional criteria of being within 45 metres of a fire main outlet applies. So for figure C, the one firefighting shaft satisfies both criteria, i.e. all parts of the floor are within 60 metres of a fire main in a firefighting shaft, and all parts of the floor are within 45 metres of a fire main, either in a firefighting shaft or in a protected stairway. Figure D illustrates a situation where provision of a firefighting shaft alone satisfies the first criteria of all parts of the floor being within 60 metres of a fire main in a firefighting shaft. However, it does not meet the additional second criteria of each part of the floor being within 45 metres of a fire main, either in a firefighting shaft or in a protected stairway. So the grey bit in the figure is not covered. The solution to this scenario is to make it compliant, is to fit another fire main, either in a second firefighting shaft or in a protected stairway. So this figure illustrates provision of a fire main outlet in a protected stairway. Provision of a fire main in a protected stairway would be a cheaper option than provision of a second firefighting shaft. Similarly for figure E on the larger floor plate, provision of two firefighting shafts as shown satisfies the first criteria of each part of the floor being within 60 metres of a fire main in a firefighting shaft. However, it doesn't meet the second criteria of each part of the floor being within 45 metres of a fire main. So the grey area is not covered, and a solution is to fit two additional protected stairways with a fire main outlet in each as indicated. The third item that has been amended in Section 6 sets a new maximum story height for provision of a dry fire mains. TBE previously required the provision of a wet fire mains where a building has a story more than 60 metres above fire and rescue service access level. The amendment reduces that threshold to 50 metres maximum above fire and rescue access level for provision of a dry fire mains. Buildings with a story more than 50 metres above fire and rescue service access level now require a wet fire mains. The fourth item of change in Section 6 relates to fire vehicle access to buildings. TBE previously required access for pump appliances to within 45 metres of each door giving access to a dwelling. The amendment means the 45 metres has to be measured to all points within a dwelling, as opposed to the front or back door of a dwelling. It effectively means pumping appliances should be able to get closer to a building. The 45 metres is a hose route distance, and this requirement obviously does not apply to buildings that have a fire mains. A new requirement for the provision of evacuation alert sounder systems in buildings containing flats with a story more than 11 metres above ground level has been introduced in TBE. Although rare, there may be occasion for a fire and rescue service incident commander to order the partial or full evacuation of a building in the event of a fire or other emergency. Provision of these evacuation alert sounder systems will assist the fire and rescue service to evacuate these types of mid to high-rise residential buildings. Its felt blocks of flats with a top story lower than 11 metres can be evacuated by the fire and rescue service personnel simply by knocking on doors. So the British Standards Institution, BSI, has created a new standard for such systems, BS 8629, which is entitled The Code of Practice for the Design, Installation, Commissioning and Maintenance of Evacuation Alert Systems for use by fire and rescue services in buildings containing flats. It was published in 2019 and updated in 2023. So this is the standard that is cited in the TBE guidance for these systems to adhere to. Also introduced in Section 6 of TBE is a new requirement for the provision of wayfinding signage in buildings containing flats with a top story more than 11 metres above ground level. The requirement applies to floor indicator signs and individual flat indicator signs. Again, this measure will assist fire and rescue service personnel in carrying out their function of search and rescue operations in these types of mid to high-rise residential buildings. Lastly, in relation to changes to Section 6 of TBE is a new requirement for the provision of a secure information box in buildings containing flats with a top story more than 11 metres above ground level. This box may contain a copy of up-to-date floor plans, location of key firefighting equipment, and contact details for the person in charge of the building. Again, this information can be very useful to fire and rescue service personnel attending an incident. Best practice guidance in the Code of Practice for the provision of premises information boxes in residential buildings published by the Fire Industry Association, the FIA, is cited in TBE. Please be aware it is not for building regulations to specify the type of information that should be held in such boxes. That is a matter for other legislation. Technical Booklet E only requires the provision of the physical box. So those last three items of evacuation alert sounder systems, wayfinding signage and secure information boxes does address in part recommendations from the Phase 1 report to the Grenfell Tower fire inquiry. The new Section 7, entitled Fire Safety Information in TBE, is guidance to the new Regulation 37A, Fire Safety Information in Part E of the Building Regulations. An extensive list of details of information is given in the section. For most buildings, basic information on the type and location of fire protection measures in a building should be sufficient. A more detailed record should be provided for buildings where a fire safety strategy is employed, along with the procedures for operating and maintaining any fire protection measures. Assumptions in the design of fire safety systems should be documented. Also, any assumptions in the design of the fire safety arrangements for the management of the building should be documented. The list is not exhaustive, but is intended as a guide to the kind of information that should be provided. Each design should be considered on a case-by-case basis to determine the level of detail required. In relation to existing buildings subject to extension and/or alteration work, the guidance clarifies the information required should only relate to the work involved where it has an impact on the fire safety strategy of the building. The section also gives some information on who the person with fire safety duties is in buildings containing flats, saying ordinarily this will be the landlord, freeholder, or management agent for the building. New Section 8, entitled Automatic Fire Suppression Systems in TBE, gives guidance on sprinklers as one way to satisfy the requirements of new Regulation 37B in Part E of the Building Regulations. For the purposes of TBE, sprinklers are the only form of automatic fire suppression system referenced throughout the book. The guidance outlines where sprinklers are required in TBE and where sprinklers can also act as a compensatory feature throughout the book. In relation to new Regulation 37B, the guidance lists the prescriptive list of buildings the regulation applies to and clarifies the types of work when the regulation applies, i.e. it applies when a building is newly erected, when a building is formed after a material change of use, and to certain extensions and/or alterations to existing buildings, but only where 37B has been applied and the building is already provided with an automatic sprinkler system, and hence extending the system into the extended, altered bit of the building and recertifying the system makes sense. For the design of sprinkler systems, the guidance makes reference to the up-to-date Code of Practice standards. So for residential buildings, it's BS 9251 of 2021, and that's the fire sprinkler systems for domestic and residential occupancies. And for non-residential buildings or residential buildings outside the scope of BS 9251, then it's BS EN 12845 of 2015, fixed firefighting systems, automatic sprinkler systems, design, installation and maintenance. The old standard BS 5306, fire extinguishing installations and equipment on premises, is no longer cited in Technical Booklet E. Guidance is given on water supplies and pumps to be in accordance with the relevant recommendations of the standards, and that designers ensure adequate pressures and flow rates are achieved from mains. Otherwise, a tank and pump arrangement should be used. Developers and designers should discuss their project-specific details with NI Water early in the design process. Lastly, regarding other automatic fire suppression systems, evidence of performance testing and approval for use in buildings would be essential. The department's view is currently sprinklers are the only life safety systems capable of satisfying the requirements of Regulation 37B. If another system is chosen, then designers should demonstrate any such system gives an equivalent or better level of performance to that of an automatic sprinkler system. In relation to the publications referred to throughout the book, there are a number of new standards cited associated with these changes. So these include BS EN 8120 and BS EN 8170, which cover the safety rules for the construction and installation of lifts, specifically for passenger and goods passenger lifts, and accessibility to lifts for persons, including persons with disability. So these standards for evacuation lift installations replace BS EN 81-1 and BS EN 81-2. BS EN 1993-1-2 Eurocode 3 for the design of steel structures general rules. This replaces the use of BS 5950 Part 8, where it was cited previously in the book. BS EN 12101 Part 8 for smoke and heat control systems, and specifically smoke control dampers, is now cited in the book. BS EN 14604 for smoke alarm devices is now cited in the book, and that replaces the old standard BS 5446 Part 1. BS 8629, the Code of Practice for the Design, Installation, Commissioning and Maintenance of Evacuation Alert Systems for use by Fire and Rescue Service in buildings containing flats, is now in the book. BS 9251 for fire sprinkler systems for domestic and residential occupancies is in the book. BS 9991 for fire safety in the design, management and use of residential buildings. The Fire Industry Association publication, The Code of Practice for the Provision of Premises Information Boxes in Residential Buildings, is cited. And the HMO Fire Safety Guide, published by the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service, is now cited in the book. Lastly, HTM 0502, which is Fire Code Guidance for Fire Safety in the Design of Healthcare Premises, and published by the Department of Health England, is now cited in the book. So there's also a number of revisions to existing standards which are cited already. Of note is the total removal of the BS 5588 series from the book. So parts 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10 of BS 5588 have all been replaced throughout the book. There is one change in Technical Booklet R, access to and use of buildings, which we are taking the opportunity as part of this package of amendments to the building regulations to also address. So in TBR we felt the use of the words stay put in quotations and the connotations that come with that expression could be misinterpreted by some as staying put in their own home in the context of a fire occurrence. This is not the case, and the term is used in TBR in the context of allowing people with disabilities or reduced mobility to remain longer in their own home. Hence, the opportunity has been taken to change this wording to as shown on screen. So that covers the changes in Technical Booklet E and the single item change in Technical Booklet R. There's been quite a number of changes made, in particular to Technical Booklet E, associated with the legislative change to the building regulations. The official departmental document housing all of the Technical Booklet changes is in Amendments Booklet AMD 9. This document can be accessed on the department's website at the address on screen. The idea is to read this AMD 9 booklet in conjunction with the original 2012 technical booklets. For those who don't like reading an amendments booklet along with the original booklets, a track changes version of Technical Booklet E has been produced and placed on the department website at the address shown on screen. So this TBE version not only incorporates the changes in the AMD 9 booklet of 2024, but also the 2022 amendments to TBE housed in Amendments Booklet AMD 7. So the department does plan to take forward further amendments to Technical Booklet E in the near future, and a fully consolidated booklet with all amendments incorporated will likely be produced. So just to try and sum up all of this in relation to the fire safety changes, hopefully if you take anything away from this, you remember these bullet points. In Part E, fire safety of the building regulations, two new regulations have been added. A new Regulation 37A for the provision of fire safety information. The regulation applies to all relevant premises as defined under the Fire and Rescue Services Northern Ireland Order 2006 and all buildings containing one or more flats. There's also a new Regulation 37B requiring provision of automatic fire suppression systems in three building types only. They are buildings containing flats with a storey more than 11 metres above ground level, purpose-built student accommodation with a storey more than 11 metres above ground level, and residential care premises. There are also some amendments to Regulation 32, application and interpretation, as a consequence of the two new regulations. In Part A of the building regulations, there are changes to Regulation 8, application to material change of use, with a new table to Regulation 8 and new notes to the table to Regulation 8. These changes again occur with the introduction of the new regulations 37A and 37B. With regard to Technical Booklet E, in Section 2, Means of Escape, the standard for automatic fire detection and alarm provision in dwelling houses and flats has been amended to require smoke alarms in every habitable room. Also for Means of Escape provisions for flats, the design standard BS 9991 of 2015 is now referenced. In Section 6, Facilities and Access for the Fire and Rescue Service, there are amendments in relation to firefighting shaft provision, fire mains and hose line distance provisions, and fire vehicle access distances. There are also new provisions for evacuation alert sounder systems, wayfinding signage, and secure information boxes, all in buildings containing flats with a top storey more than 11 metres above ground level. There's a new Section 7, Fire Safety Information, to support new Regulation 37A. There's a new Section 8, Automatic Fire Suppression Systems, to support new Regulation 37B. And there are a number of new standards added and existing standards revised in the publications referred to section. Just a brief reminder of some relevant dates. The Building Regulations Amendment was made law on the 4th of November 2024 through the statutory rule, the Building Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2024. The requirements come into operation on the 6th of May 2025. The relevant documents of the statutory rule, the amendments booklet AMD9, and a track changes version of Technical Booklet E can be accessed on the department's website. Any questions you may have can be submitted to the email address as shown on screen. Thank you for listening.